That wasn't a
If you
standard.
hit that thing with your ring again and put a dent in that fret, I'm going to come across the table. Don't. Oh, God, that's great. Listen to it ring, though. Did you hear it ring?
It's going to dent my ring before it'll dent the fret.
Did you hear it ring, though? That was cool.
Hi, I'm Marc Quigley. This is Paul Smith. And this is From the Archives, a series where we break down and unbox guitars from our archives, significant guitars in PRS history, and discuss them.
I hear we're going to go after two of the original ones that we got the orders for this coming
That's right.
from.
Things that helped us get to where we are now.
The original Custom and the original PRS before there was a PRS standard and before the word 24 existed. So it was
That's right.
Eventually what turned into a Custom 24?
Yeah, numbers stopped at 23 before then.
23 frets.
We invented 24.
That wouldn't have gone well, 23 frets.
Probably not.
Yeah. All right, which one do you want to pull out first?
That one right there on the end of that rack.
This one here.
That one.
All right. Oh, that guitar.
It's a beauty.
Yay. So I went on the road with two guitars, and this is the Curly Maple one of the two that I went on the road with to get orders. There was a prospectus written for this company, but we needed orders. I had gone to a lawyer in Annapolis, and I said, I need to raise the money for this company. He said, well, if you can bring back $100,000 worth of orders, I can get you the money for the company. I said, okay. So I went on the road. I came back and put $300,000 worth of orders on his desk, and his jaw dropped. He went, never got the money from him.
Oh, no.
No, that didn't happen. It was, he never thought I'd come back with $100,000 worth of orders, much
I guess he was bluffing.
No, he wasn't bluffing. He just didn't expect it.
Yeah.
He wasn't bluffing at all. Like, he was kind of stunned. I mean, come back with $100,000 worth of orders, and I can get you the money to start your company. And I came back with $300,000 worth of orders. He just wasn't the person to help us raise the money. Eventually, we showed those orders to Warren Essenu, the chairman of our board still, and
Right.
he said, I can help you. So we were able to raise some money, but you know, it wasn't just this big order from Sam Ash Music that we got. It was orders from up and down the East Coast.
Right.
So with the $300,000 worth of orders that we came back with, we were able to raise $500,000 to start the company. And you know, we needed the rent, we needed to hire people, we needed to order the tooling, we needed to order the parts, we needed to order the wood, we needed to, you know, get the brochures made, everything. I got the orders in November, and about April 3rd of the next year, we got the money in the door from the investors, and we were off to the races. I called everybody, I said, ship it, make it, do it, go, 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 you know. Paid the rent that we had been in the building for 3 months and paid the rent.
It must have felt really good to write that check.
No.
No?
No. What felt really good was the day that the dealers paid for the guitars and they sold them, and then I got a reorder. Right. That was the relieving moment. The relieving moment was the reorder moment.
Right. Yeah, you're still walking on the razor's edge before
Yeah,
that
because
happened.
I've seen products go out the door, dealers sold them just like that, didn't want another one.
I understand that maple tops at that time had fallen out of favor.
Yeah, people were painting guitars.
Yeah.
They were black and white and, you know, graphics and this, that, and the other. But it was time for the Curly Maple to return to our industry. As far as I'm concerned, you know, Curly Maple is part of the legacy of guitars, especially from Gibson in the 50s, you know, starting in 1959, you know, big time again, 58. So I always thought it was cool. But at the time, the only Curly Maple guitars at NAMM, our trade show, were in violin booths on the back of a violin. They weren't even on the front, you know. There was no Curly Maple guitars. Steinberger guitars were hot. Jackson guitars were hot. Kramer guitars were hot.
Aquanet hairspray was hot.
How would you know that?
From history books.
This is after my time. That's great. I asked Ted McCarty from Gibson, who was my teacher, I said, what's the deal with the Curly Maple top? He says, well, you know, we knew Leo didn't have a carving machine, and we had tested everything. And a Curly Maple top over mahogany sounded better, and we wanted to hide the maple top. It wasn't curly at the time. the maple top from Leo. So we painted it gold so you couldn't see it at the trade show. I said, but Ted, you could see the curly maple inside where the binding was
Right
on
in
the
here.
inside. He goes, shut up. So what had happened was that, you know, they were using maple and some of it was curly, and they decided to start to show it off, you know, 58. But the original gold tops were gold to hide the maple cap from Leo. And they knew Leo didn't have a carving machine. And they were going to, you know, give it more of a violin carve, like their arch tops.
Yeah.
So that's where the history of it comes from. That piece of maple was bought at a store in Michigan, and they wanted nothing to do with guitar makers. I said, what's the problem? He says, they never paid the bills. I said, I'll give you the money now. They were like, what? I said, no, literally, I'll pay you right now for the wood. Oh, okay, maybe it's not such a bad idea, you know. But they had a bad history with guitar makers,
Yeah.
not paying their bills. Would this guitar get through now? No. They'd do everything they could possibly do to level the finish out some. They would have discarded the bridge because it was too rounded over. There's so many things, the mold of the pickups, you name it. This thing would be waved off, and I think it's magic. I mean, it got us the orders to get us started, right?
Yeah, the
Binding's too thin.
binding's thinner.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's too thin, but that's a matter of taste.
I didn't think it was too thin at the time. You know what's interesting about it?
Lots of things.
Yeah, well, when you book match a top, you cut the piece of wood in half and open it up. If you take a board and you cut it and you slip it over, it's called a slip match. This is a slip match, not a book match. They'd send that back now.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, you see all these little
All the
brown lines in the
beautiful
top? That's red maple. That's normal. I thought this thing was beautiful. So did the whole world. But this thing, you can't send us that. No, we're spoiled.
I heard there was a story about the curly maple and selling them.
I went with a friend named Tim, and we went together and we hit all these stores, and we would get an order for 6 or 8 guitars in each of the stores. But coming down the freeway into New York, I had been told to call Sam Ash. So I walk into the store to go see Richie on 48th Street at the time, Richard Ash. And this guy is in really well dressed on the floor with a razor knife, and he's cutting open a keyboard box. And he turns around to me like the Exorcist, and he goes, "Didn't think you'd see me down here, did you?" I went, I didn't. I have 2 guitars, this one and the other guitar in my hand. Richie Ash put this guitar through its paces. Now, it had been on the road with me for a week, so it stayed in perfect tune. You know, the strings were all stretched out and everything was cool. And, you know, at the time, he was a great guitar player. Haven't heard Richie play in a long time, but he really, you know, shredder at the time. And he loved it. And he looks at all his salespeople on 48th Street in New York and says, "Curly maple, that's not going to go well, right?" And all his salesmen went, we're going to be able to. He said, "You sure you're going to be able to sell curly maple guitars?" They said, "Absolutely, we can sell them." He went, "All right." And he gave me an order for, 12 guitars. And then he repeated it in another 12 stores, and then he repeated it 4 times, once every 3 months. It was, you know, almost a $300,000 order that he gave me, and half the guitars were these.
Yeah.
But
Now,
they didn't know if curly maple was going to sell again. It had not been. It wasn't the thing.
Right.
The Les Pauls were black, and Strats were not curly maple, and Jacksons were painted, and, you know, Kramers and all that stuff. It was just not that time. This was a return to the days of the 50s.
Yeah.
Now, I had parked next door in a parking garage to Sam Ash on 48th Street. When I walked out of the store, I couldn't find the parking garage, and it was next door. I was so, oh no. I mean, I had just gotten this order, and if I didn't fill it, I was never going to be allowed in New York again as far as I was concerned. So as I went into the Holland Tunnel, I thought, well, I'm going to go underground until I can come back. And we had to, and that order was in November, and we delivered in August.
Yeah.
These were the original locking collars that were
Right.
made on the lathe in the mill at Eric Pritchard's house by a friend of mine that worked at Rolls-Royce in Canada. And
Yeah.
he called me one day and he said, I'm going to come help you. I said, what? He said, I know you need help. And he drove his family down and made these things for us. And then we were off to the races. It
That's
was great.
amazing.
We ran out of caps one day and they went into archives and stole the caps so they could ship a guitar. That's where they went. Right?
Gotcha.
But this was before, I was still hand cutting the birds with a jeweler's saw. You can see
Yeah, you can see the detail on the feathers.
And the space that was around mixing rosewood powder
the filler.
and
Yeah.
epoxy. So it was before we had molds, and so I would take Gibson pickups and I would take 2 bobbins and cut them in half and make a deeper bobbin. And so these, are 2 of these bobbins glued together because I need a little bit more winding room.
Yeah.
And the back of the bridge was a little more rounded than we do now.
Oh yeah.
So
I remember that.
had the sweet switch. That's a brass jack. We ended up doing them out of aluminum and color them like brass. But at the time, people were walking out of their amplifiers and breaking the jack plate all the time,
Because they were plastic.
Yeah, because they were plastic. And the other thing is if you turn it upside down, there were 6 holes in a Strat, and you couldn't get the strings out. So we finally made this rounded. But I cut it square at the time.
Yeah.
And the heel was really small. Our cutters were bigger than this, so it sloped into the neck a little slower when we finally started making them. Same thing here.
Yeah.
But it's the guitar that got us the orders,
So
It got stolen and returned. And the person said, as long as I don't go to jail, I'll get you the guitar back, which I thought was really decent in the end. And that it went away was not decent, but
yeah,
we got it back.
It sounded like they were at a bad point in their life.
Yeah, or something.
So, well, you're a very kind person.
Well, what was I going to do? Thank you very much for the guitar. Here's the police. I mean, I'm really glad we got it back.
Yeah, it's a great piece. It's in such
carve
good shape.
was hand done, so it's a little deeper
Yep.
than we did. So there's another one of these. There were
Yes.
2 guitars, right? There was
Yep.
the Curly Maple one, which was the Custom, the PRS Custom, and then there was the PRS,
Quigley.
which was a white guitar with a lot of blue pearl on it. all
Right. Do you want to take that one out?
Yeah, sure, why not? It's interesting. One more thing, the nut is made out of pure Delrin AF. It was made out of a plate. It was before we molded them. And at the time, these were big frets at
Yeah.
the time. Now they're considered low, wide frets, but at the time they were big frets, right?
Right. So this was like a sheet of Delrin?
It was a big plate. It was
Okay.
a 1/4 thick, and we would cut pieces out of the plate.
Is that a difficult material to work with?
No, it works great.
Yeah.
Most of the nuts at the beginning of PRS were a molded version of that with black dye in it. So this would have been less money because it didn't have the curly maple top. So these are the 2 guitars next to each other, right? So this had moon inlays and that had bird inlays. I thought nobody was going to order that. I liked these guitars with the white guitars with too much pearl on them because they have a yellow-blue tint to them.
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't have a knob mold, so the knobs were cracking. We finally made them out of the same thing they make model cars out of, so the plastic doesn't crack.
Right, and these are made out of plexiglass?
Yeah, acrylic, yeah.
Acrylic.
Yeah. I lent this to Ted Nugent for this tour because I didn't have another guitar, and I needed him playing the guitar on tour. I needed every piece of advertising I could possibly get.
Yeah.
I don't know, it was, I thought we were going to sell Moon guitars, and there were a few of those.
Right.
When people said, I got to have the birds, I was like, what? I was like, what? I didn't understand. I didn't understand that it was going to stick.
Tell us about the moons. I think some people out there know, but it's a pretty interesting design.
It was a dot that was the same curve as this.
Yeah.
We would twist them at the same angle as that, which is the same curve as this, right? And I thought the moons were cool. David Grissom still likes them.
Yeah.
The DGTs. It was just a simple guitar. I thought people wanted simple guitars. I didn't think they wanted complex guitars, but people are way more into how things look then you would know. A couple times I made people what I thought was magic guitar. They said, it's great. Got a red one? I'm like, what do you mean? You just got a magic guitar. They went, no, I trust you on the guitar part. I want a different color. I was like, really?
As consistent as our guitars are, they each have their own sort of soul, and they feel different somehow. They sound a little bit different, and some of them will speak to you more than others.
That's true.
So,
I have a guitar right now. We were playing in a band, you and me were playing in a band with Doug Shive. He says, you're bringing the other guitar, right? I was like, no, this one sounds just as good. He goes, no. Doug had his preference over which guitar I brought.
Right.
So anyway, I thought this was cool.
Tell us about the white paint on the bottom of the neck, because that's
well,
not
I just
something you
didn't
see all
tape
the time.
off the bottom of the fretboard, which that didn't last long.
Yeah.
I mean, I figured why.
Because you just thought you're not going to see it because it's on the bottom.
It's on the bottom, and that didn't last long. Look, the original Bird guitar had a bird on the heel. That didn't last long.
Yeah.
The original headstock was way bigger, and pieces would break off it.
Speaking of the bird, so the early guitars, or at least this one, had the bird instead of any kind of logo.
But when we went to market, we put the decal on that was made by the Wilson Tennis Racket logo people. That's
Right,
where
that water transfer decals.
Water transfer decals.
But you were originally thinking about using this.
Yeah, I
as the-
thought Smith was a terrible name.
Yeah.
I thought the most common name in America wasn't going to work, and I didn't want somebody to take the company from me, so I figured if I put the name on the headstock, I'd be in a better position. And then Jim Greenhill looked at me, he goes, your name's going to go great in the South. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, Paul Reed Smith, rolls right off your tongue. And I was like, are you kidding me? It's going to work? And then Jimmy Wallace calls me up one day. He goes, my Paul Reed this, and my Paul Reed that, and my Paul Reed this, and my Paul Reed that. I'm like, oh my God, he's using my name as an inanimate object to my face. Now, he called me one day. He said, now, Paul, you go in the back and you pick me out a real nice top. In other words, you go through that stack of wood and you pick out the best top. I said, I'm charging you. That's the day 10 top started. Because I just wanted people to get whatever was the next top in the stack.
Yeah.
And that's not what they wanted us to do. They wanted us to sift through the tops.
And that was Jimmy Wallace?
Yeah, Jimmy Wallace. Which he's been a force to be reckoned with in our industry for a long time with the Vintage Guitar Show in Dallas.
Sure.
And he's got a store in Dallas.
Yeah.
We've been friends a really long time. But these are the first two guitars. I mean, they're without serial numbers.
Right.
These were the ones that we got the orders from.
So what was the color palette at the beginning? There were only a
Pearl
handful
white
of
and pearl
colors.
black, that was it.
Yeah.
And
And,
this-
then for
this-
the maple.
We did them in vintage yellow, royal blue, and scarlet red. There were 3 colors.
Okay. And that was the first
was it.
poster was the 3 maple tops. Mm-hmm. And this guitar was in the poster? Is that? Yeah.
Well,
That's-
yeah.
I
it was in the
remember that.
poster, yeah. I have fascinating times. The fact that we got it back, that it was returned, the fact that we have this guitar is great. I mean, it gives us something to talk to everybody that's watching through the internet on this.
Right.
It gives some history. I remember very clearly, making them.
So at this time, there were no models. Like this
Yeah, it was 2 models.
wasn't a custom, and that wasn't
If
a
you
standard.
hit that thing with your ring again and put a dent in that fret, I'm going to come across the table. I don't. Oh, God, that's great. Listen to it ring, though. Did you hear it ring?
It's
when
going to dent my ring before it'll dent the
no.
fret.
Did you hear it ring, though? That was cool.
It sounds amazing.
What were you saying?
You had told me that at this time, there wasn't like a custom
No,
and a standard.
there was a custom and a PRS. This
Okay.
was not a standard.
It was not a standard.
Yeah,
Okay.
but that
I
was called the
misunderstood.
PRS Custom.
Which
And
this
was,
would later become the Custom 24 because
That's
we
great.
started doing 22
22 fret
So,
guitars.
and then that would have been the standard 24.
Right. This would have been a standard 24 with moons in pearl white
Right, which this is solid mahogany, and this has the maple cap.
cap. Yeah. Same guitar, same tooling, just different thickness. I mean, it's the same thickness top. It's just the curly maple's a sandwich of the mahogany.
Yeah. At this time, we had less of a headstock angle than we do now.
Yeah.
So that was something you found later on to be important.
Well, we could increase it and get a better sound off the nut, but if you went too far, the guitar would go out of tune. So the whole idea was to cock
Find
it back
that
a little
sweet
bit,
spot.
but not too much. The original neck carve is still implied in almost everything we make. This
Right.
was the regular neck carve. There wasn't a pattern.
Yeah,
thin.
it feels familiar.
There wasn't a pattern wide or any of that stuff. This was in between. This was what they called a regular neck carve. I don't know. We changed the fingerboard wood when the whole Brazilian rosewood, East Indian rosewood thing changed. We ended up with
changed too, right? The inlay material changed for a while too, right? Because it originally wasn't an abalone, and then we had to switch to mother of pearl.
Yeah, what's gone back and forth, but
Yeah.
abalone's been a staple for us forever. Now, it's cut at an angle and glued together. It's called ablam. It's laminated together so they can use much more of the shell.
Right.
I like the moon inlays with the pearl on one side and the abalone on the other, but
Yeah, me too.
the industry in some ways decides what they like and what they give you permission for and what they don't give you permission for. They gave us permission for the birds, which I thought was cool. They gave us permission for this neck shape and the body shape and the way it balanced and all that other stuff. It's interesting, this had a single action truss rod in it, and now we use a double action truss rod, so you do the truss rod one way and the neck bows backwards, you do the other way and it bows forwards. At this point, it was just a single action rod.
Right.
I don't know, I think it's not that different.
Sure.
It's not that different. If you pull a new Custom 24 out in vintage yellow, it's not that different.
Right. There are a lot of subtle differences, but to me, they feel different, but not better. These feel like one dude made them.
Well, I had a lot of help.
Yeah.
I had a lot of help.
The stuff we're making now is so much more consistent, I would say. So tell me about this sweet switch.
Well, this was just your save your ass sweet switch. Basically, it added like 40 foot of cable to the guitar. And
Yeah.
so the tone went from really
Just
bright
changing
and
the
clear
impedance.
to, no, it's a series of inductors and capacitors spread out, just like a guitar cable, spread out inductance and capacitance. And we would kick it in, and if you were playing through a Marshall 50 at the time, which was very common, or an amp that was just too bright, this would make the solo tone beautiful.
Gotcha.
I mean, Jeff Beck, if you watch him play, he's always messing with the tone control. He was rolling it back all the time. He had his own version of a sweet switch. He was constantly playing with the tone controls to change the high end to be the way he wanted. So, some of the high end he wanted from the distortion of the amp, and some of the high end from the guitar when he was,
Yeah.
playing.
So, and then on the rotary, I was just playing these the other day
Were you
for
really?
the first time through an amp. They sound incredible, particularly this one. But
Oh, they have different souls on. That's great.
yeah, I mean they sound very different. But there's an out of phase sound on here.
I got a call from Gibson. They said, you got to get rid of that.
Oh yeah.
And I went, Henry, what are you saying? I got to get rid of the out of phase sound? He said, yeah. I said, I'm going to make it better. If you make me change it, it's the one tone people don't like. If you make me change it, I'll make it better. He goes, well, I'm being told by my people that you're violating our patent, which was an L Success pickup patent, which I didn't really think I was violating, but I didn't want the quibble. I didn't want the fight. And over and over again, I said, Henry, if you make me change it, I'm going to make it better. So I changed it. So ended up with the outside two coils and the inside two coils in both pickups. Nobody ever called me and said, I really miss the out of phase. Maybe 2 orders over.
Yeah. Peter Green called you up.
Is that true?
No, I'm kidding. He was famous for an out of phase sound.
What a guitar player.
He was incredible. He was a very inventive guitar player.
I loved that period of music. I loved that period of guitar. Kind of laid down the law about what was acceptable and what was not, and that we found some middle ground with Fender and Gibson is great. And this was the beginning of it. That's cool.
Very nice.
Just keep dinging the guitar with your ring. It's great.